Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Our coverage of Phantom Nightmare continues, and let me tell you, it's been a doozy of a set. From ancient themes coming back with a fresh coat of paint, to some more modern archetypes getting some new support to round out some of their rougher edges, there really is something for everyone in this set. Except for one little thing. Both Visas and Albaz only got a single card, so loreheads like me have to wait even longer to figure out what the heck is going on with them. Luckily, Konami hasn't completely dropped the ball with lore updates for this set, because on top of new Diabellstar happenings, the last theme from the Dracoslayer Storyline that we haven't covered yet has received a substantial update. And while it has rendered my Dracoslayer lore video more or less obsolete, no, I'm still not over it, we did just cover Ignites last month, so there's no better time to talk about them than now. Premiering in the November 2015 core set Dimension of Chaos, Majespecters are the second theme to show up in the Dracoslayer cycle. And unlike Ignites, who kind of tripped over the starting line, seeing little to no competitive success at all, until over 8 years later, these cute little critters hit the ground, or should I say wind, running. They got splashed into every pendulum pile you could think of, boasting near impenetrable protection effects, more search redundancy than you could shake a stick at, and superb removal. But the theme was no slouch standing alone either. It's been going through some turbulent times lately now thanks to Master Rule 4, but some new cards from Phantom Nightmare have given it a breath of fresh air, and it's ready to take the competition by storm once again. So before I run out of wind puns prior to the video starting, let's go over all these friend-shaped spirits, consult the barometer to find out what kind of storms are brewing, then see if we can find any allies who can help us seize the wind. Get ready to catch the updraft because it's time for Majespecters Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. So, what's the deal with Majespecters? Well, they're a series of wind spellcaster pendulum monsters that, strangely enough for the middle of Arc V, possess no pendulum effects at all. Kinda like the opposite of Ignites. But for as much potential is missed because of this, it also means there's no possibility of them adding any special summoning restrictions like we'd see in themes like Klee and Zephyra. So Majespecters are among the first pendulum-focused archetypes to let you go completely ham with deck building. As for its playstyle, it revolves around tributing your monsters to fuel super powerful back row. Removal, negation, summons from deck, you name it, these cards can do it. But what makes Majespecters so terrifying is the fact that almost none of the members of the theme can be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and that makes them supremely difficult to interact with. Basically, the only way you're stopping a Majespecter is either by punching over it, or hitting it with some kind of non-targeting, non-destruction removal. And even if you do get rid of them, as long as those scales are maintained, they're bringing them back again next turn. This level of protection is part of the reason a certain member of the theme has gotten into some hot water in the past, but we'll get to them later. For now, let's start by covering the first three monsters that form the backbone of this strategy. Majespecter Raccoon Bunbuku is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack, 900 defense, and a scale of 5. Majespecter Crow Yada is a level 4 monster with 1000 attack, 1500 defense, and a scale of 5. And Majespecter Fox Kyubi is a level 4 monster with 1500 attack, 1000 defense, and a scale of 2. They all have the same effect where, when normal or special summoned, you can add one Majespecter card from your deck to your hand, with Yada searching new spells, Kyubi searching new traps, and Bunbuku searching monsters, even including copies of itself. Like most decks, these are your core monsters, and I don't really need to explain why, but I'm going to do so for the runtime. Searching is a bare minimum mechanic that any deck worth its salt should have today, and the more you can do it, the more consistent your strategy will be. But these three are better than most because their targeting immunity protects them from the likes of targeted hand traps like Imperm and Valor. Heck, even Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill targets, and that's starting to see some play recently. So unless your opponent drops an Ash Blossom or Forbidden Droplets specifically, these three are going to get you what you need. And with them being pendulum monsters, they're supremely repeatable. Just get one of each into rotation and you're set for the rest of the game. But be careful, because these effects, and I cannot believe that Konami is still doing this at this point, have the universally hated "when you can" phrasing, and as such, can miss timing. Usually this isn't going to be a problem, but some of our newer cards do brush up against this interaction, so make sure that summoning one of these little guys is the last thing you do in a chain. Otherwise, your chances of getting that search will be gone with the wind. Alright, with those 3 done, let's move on to the rest of the squad, which do their own unique things. Majespecter Cat Nekomata is a level 3 monster with 100 attack, 1800 defense, and a scale of 2. And when normal or special summoned, you can add a Majespecter card from your deck to your hand during the end phase. That's right, it wasn't enough for us to have 3 searchers, we've also got an on-theme Skarm. Unlike Skarm though, this searches you any on-theme card, not just monsters. But like Skarm, you will forget to resolve it half the time, so be careful about that. While it's a little bit slower than I'd like, especially in the face of cards like Bunbuku, it's still a pretty good idea to keep it around, because while we're not exactly lacking when it comes to scale 2 monsters, it never hurts to have a spare, just in case. And if nothing else, Nekomata can grab you a starter for next turn as insurance in case your board gets broken. And isn't that just the cat's pajamas? Majespecter Porcupine Yama Arashi is a level 4 monster with 1500 attack and defense and a scale of 2. During the main phase, if you control a Majespecter monster as a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a Majespecter spell in your graveyard and set it to your field. This is one of our newer cards, and you can actually tell because it says if, not when. But goofy rulings aside, this is now your primary search target for Bunbuku, as it makes for a phenomenal extender. Summon it next to the Bunbuku you searched this with, and that's any link 2 you could ask for. As for what we'll be going into, we'll get into that in a bit, but trust me, it's worth the wait. The spell resetting effect is very handy too, because we've got some real bangers. And while admittedly most are quick plays, which makes their deployment slower than implied, it's still great for the grind game. So don't be surprised if your opponent prickles a bit when they see this card. Majespecter Toad Ogama is a level 4 monster with 1300 attack, 500 defense, and a scale of 5. When it's normal or special summoned, you can set a Majespecter spell or trap card from your deck, but you can't activate that card for the rest of the turn. This is kind of like if Yada and Kyubi got rolled into one, but don't think that this card can fill both roles. Ogama has uses all its own. For one, it gives you a much more flexible choice than the dedicated searchers, letting you grab whatever you need to complete your board setup. The activation delay also isn't even that big of a deal, since most of our back row is made of trap cards and quick play spells which can't be activated the turn they're set anyway. And because it's set straight from the deck instead of searching it outright, it's absurdly resistant to hand traps, bypassing the deck lockout of Droll and being outright immune to Ash Blossom. So make sure to activate this effect last on a giant pendulum summon, thus chain blocking the rest of your Majespecter effects, and no hand trap will stop you from getting everything you need to make your opponent croak. Majesty Pegasus the Dracoslayer is a level 4 monster with 1500 attack and defense and a scale of 2, and they're always treated as a Majespecter card. As a pendulum scale, if you have a Dracoslayer or Majespecter card in your other pendulum zone, you can add one Dracoslayer pendulum monster with a different name from that card from your deck to your hand, then you can destroy one card in your pendulum zone. As a monster, as a quick effect, you can discard it, and for the rest of the turn, your opponent can't target or destroy your Dracoslayer monsters with card effects. And if it's pendulum summoned or special summoned by the effect of a Dracoslayer card, you can add a field spell card from your deck to your hand, then discard a card. Note that it says any field spell, a notoriously dangerous line of text. While we do have some on-theme field spells we can get with this effect, there are also some pretty filthy ones we can grab with it too, but we'll go over them a tad later. I'll admit this is far more of a Dracoslayer card than a Majespecter one, but thankfully, Dracoslayers play very well with our theme, and we'll be sure to go over how once we reach the tech pick section. On top of that, this card's pendulum effect enables that entire engine, even making space in your scales for the monster that you searched if you need it. Majesty Pegasus even lets those Dracoslayers get in on the Majespecter protection with that quick effect. After all, who doesn't love an untargetable and indestructible Ignister Prominence, even if it is only for one turn? Once you do that, your opponent will definitely know that you aren't horsing around. Majespecter Unicorn KIRIN is a level 6 monster with 2000 attack and defense and a scale of 2. And during either player's turn, you can target a pendulum monster in your monster zone and one monster your opponent controls and return both targets to the hand. Oh lord, KIRIN may not seem like anything special nowadays, but back in the early Pendulum era, this card was absolutely disgusting. It's a quick effect bounce for anything threatening that can be splashed into just about any Pendulum deck. And with it being a Majespecter, it also came with the targeting and effect destruction protection, making it much harder to interact with than it had any business being. And the loss of a pendulum monster doesn't actually mean anything to you, since you can just pendulum summon that monster right back on your next turn. In fact, it saw so much success that, at time of recording, KIRIN is currently banned in every format: TCG, OCG, even Master Duel, but with plenty of other monsters available in the game today that do way more for way less, and the pendulum mechanic being a shadow of its former self courtesy of Master Rule 4, there are plenty of arguments for letting KIRIN out of the stables. As for how it performs in the deck it belongs to, it was just as potent of an option in Majespecters as any other deck, if not a bit tricky to pendulum summon without outside help. After all, Majespecter scales only go up to 5. It would be nice for Majespecters to have their main deck boss back, but given Konami's apparent hostility towards Pendulum for the last few years, I wouldn't put it past them to keep KIRIN banned in spite of the community's voice. After all, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it execute good ban list policy. That's all for the main deck monsters, but we also have a couple of offerings from the extra deck as well, and this is where things are gonna get silly. Majespecter Draco is a rank 4 Xyz Pendulum monster with 2300 attack, 2000 defense, and a scale of 5, requiring 2 level 4 monsters as material. While it's a pendulum scale, if you have a Majespecter or Dracoslayer card in your other pendulum zone, you can add a Majespecter card from your deck to your hand, then you can destroy a card in your pendulum zone. As a monster, it has the standard Xyz monster pendulum summoning clause, and if a monster is tributed, you can detach a material from this card to special summon a level 6 or lower wind spellcaster monster from your deck, and this effect can be used up to twice per turn. And if this card is destroyed by battle, card effect, or is tributed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. Wow, this is fantastic. As we mentioned previously, a majority of our theme's power comes from our back row, most of which will have you tributing a monster as cost. So naturally, the amount we can disrupt our opponent was limited by the amount of fodder we can scrape together by the end of our turn. Until now. Because once you tribute a monster, Draco gives you an immediate refund for it, and you may even get a search for your troubles. It even lets you summon KIRIN straight from your deck without using any of your Bunbuku searches. You know, if KIRIN was still legal. But because it lists wind spellcasters, not just Majespecters, we've got some great options beyond our theme we can pull from. The most heinous of these being the dreaded Droll and Lockbird, because if you can bounce that card back to your hand somehow, your opponent's guaranteed to have a bad time on their turn. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up being the final nail in the coffin for Droll. And finally, once it's out of material, you can simply feed it to a back row, and it'll load itself into the scale to give you even more search power. That being said, this is the first Majespecter monster we've covered to actually lack the protection effect of the rest of the theme, and that makes it a walking bullseye for interaction that your main deck monsters are safe from, which is a bit of a bummer. Nevertheless, Draco is a very welcome addition to the team, even if it is just Majesty Pegasus riding KIRIN. Hardly a dragon, but hey, it's nice to see that KIRIN's still with us in spirit. Majespecter Orthrus Nue is a Link 2 monster with 1500 attack and requires 2 pendulum monsters, including a Majespecter monster, as material. When it's Link summoned, you can add 2 face-up Majespecter monsters from your extra deck to your hand, then you can add 2 Majespecter pendulum monsters with different names from each other from your deck to your extra deck face-up. But you cannot special summon monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn, except Majespecter monsters and Dracoslayer monsters. Even before Master Rule 4 came along and nerfed the pendulum mechanic to hell and back, Majespecters had a critical weakness: being able to assemble a complete scale in a timely manner. And even if you did manage that, chances are that you wouldn't have enough monsters left to follow up with. But Nue just hands you back the material you use to make it once it hits the board, and more often than not, that's going to be Bunbuku and Yamarashi, which gives you those complete scales. It even loads up 2 more specters straight from your deck for your troubles. And because it doesn't add from deck to hand, we have another effect that bypasses Droll. How cool is that? But just like Draco, Nue also lacks the Majespecter protection effect, and with how much of an enabler it is, it's a massive lightning rod for the targeted hand traps I mentioned earlier. Because, well, what else is your opponent going to use them on? The Majespecter and Dracoslayer restrictions are also a little more frustrating than I'd like to admit. It turns out that generic pendulum support from the extra deck is getting better and better as the years go on, and not having easy access to that kind of bites. Although, given that Nue is basically Electromite on steroids, I can completely understand why those restrictions are in place. So, despite the flaws, this card is excellent, and I'm sure it's going to help Majespecters reach some Nue heights. Alright, that's all of our monsters, and since we've been alluding to their power for the whole video so far, let's finally go over those spells and traps. Majespecter Storm is a normal spell card that has you attributing a wind spellcaster to target a monster your opponent controls and shuffle it into the deck. Ooh, talk about starting off with a bang. I've said it on multiple occasions and it bears repeating. One of the most effective ways of permanently getting rid of a card is by shuffling it into its owner's deck, especially since it avoids any leave the field effects that monster might have. And because Storm doesn't have a hard once per turn clause, it's even repeatable, either through searching another copy with Yada, or resetting it from grave with Yama Arashi. And what makes it better is that this is the only spell it can reset that you can use immediately. As far as on-theme board breakers go, this is the best tool for the job that we currently have available, because it's really good at storming your opponent's defenses. Majespecter Cyclone is a quick play spell card that has you attributing a wind spellcaster to target one monster your opponent controls and destroy it. While destruction isn't as desirable a method of removal as spinning, Cyclone isn't a card you should overlook, because with it being a quick play spell, it trades removal efficiency for speed. There may often come a time where you need to deal with a monster right frickin' now, and in such case, you can flip this on your opponent's turn, or chain it from your hand during your own turn, and kick that monster right out of the way. And on the rare occasions where your opponent's able to actually target your monsters, like Draco and Niue, you can use Cyclone to escape that effect by tributing them, so long as your opponent has a monster to pop. It's not quite as quick to use as Storm, despite the fact that it's a quick play spell, but set this card with Ogama or Yamarashi, and just seeing it sitting menacingly on your side of the field will really cyclone out your opponent. Majespecter Sonics is a quick play spell card that targets a Majespecter monster you control, and until the end of the turn, its attack and defense become double its current attack and defense, but all damage it inflicts to your opponent this turn is halved. One thing you may have noticed is that while Majespecters are very good at keeping themselves safe from targeting and effect destruction, they come with weedle-bitty battle stats as a trade-off. Heck, our strongest monster, Draco, isn't even getting past a Red Eyes on its own. So if you need to brute force your way over a big Chungus, then Sonics is what you're going to want to use. Also, keep in mind that the downside of your monster only dealing half damage does not stack if you use multiple copies of Sonics. It does half damage no matter how many copies of it you play. The attack and defense bonuses, though, do stack. So if you're the kind of mad scientist who actually runs this card in multiples, then your opponent's going to get whacked for a huge chunk of damage out of nowhere. But I do really wish that it was Yamarashi on this card and not Ogama. I know that Sonics precedes Yama Arashi by almost a decade, but you can't just put Sonic on a card and then not have a spiny critter on it. Where's the alt art? Majespecter Wind is a quick play spell card that special summons a Majespecter monster from your hand or graveyard, but you can optionally tribute a Wind spellcaster on activation to summon that monster from your deck instead. And unlike the other Majespecter spells, Wind is a hard once per turn. And that's for good reason, because this card is a bop. See, most of our Majespecters are a good investment for our normal summon to begin with, but you ideally want to start with Bunbuku. But if you have access to Wind, then any Majespecter becomes Bunbuku. Heck, since Yada can search this, it's a guaranteed combo starter. Ain't that neat? And even if you can't pay the cost, that hand or grave summon isn't worth scoffing at either. Because we run Xyz monsters, then sooner or later, some of our Majespecters are going to end up in the grave where you normally can't get them. Alternatively, your Pendulum summon could be hit by a Solemn Strike or what have you, then they'll also be sent to the grave, most likely to never be seen again. But if you use Wind to summon from the graveyard, you can keep resetting it to the field with Yama Arashi's on summon effect, and you can slowly but surely climb your way back into the game. And remember that trick I mentioned with Cyclone to let Niue dodge your opponent's targeted interaction? Well, Wind is even better for that, because it doesn't even require your opponent to have a monster. This card's power definitely cannot be understated and is a massive game changer for the archetype. The only real complaint I have with it is the name. Granted that at time of recording this card hasn't come out in the TCG yet, so the official translation could end up being anything. But when it comes to the fan translation, there's no shortage of wind-themed names you could have chosen. Majespecter Squall, Majespecter Gale, but no, we went with Majespecter Wind. Clearly whoever chooses the card names was out of work that day, because that name blows. Majesty's Pegasus is a field spell card that gives all of your Majespecter monsters a 300 attack and defense boost, and you contribute a Wind spellcaster monster to special summon a level 4 or lower Majespecter monster from your deck. And here it is for the last time, the classic Dracoslayer Storyline archetypal field spell that isn't name-stamped, making it frustratingly unsearchable on theme. And the kicker is that most of these field spells aren't even that good to make up for it, with the most notable exception of this rule being Dragonic Diagram, which is still limited at time of recording. But Majesty's Pegasus is a close second, and thankfully, Majesty Pegasus does help us float this into our hand, so it's a little more searchable now. It has been upstaged a little bit since Majespecter Wind exists now, but by being a field spell, it lets you exchange a monster for a Majespecter every turn rather than just once, which is amazing. And that boost to all your Majespecters isn't nothing either. With how small they are, they'll need all the buffs they can get, and represents an extra 1800 points of damage when attacking with a full board of Majespecters into an open field, so it can make more of a difference than it lets on. But after seeing one mediocre Dracoslayer field spell after another on this channel, it's nice to see the last ones actually playable, and there's a certain majesty to that. Majespecter Gust is a normal trap card that targets a Majespecter monster in your Pendulum Zone and special summons it. This one is kinda bad, I can't lie. Majespecters already do so much searching that dismantling your scale for one more search is redundant at best, and a terrible idea at worst. If Gust was a spell card, I might be inclined to think differently since you'd probably be able to use this as an extender for link plays, but sadly, the effect is stuck on a trap card, making it slow as molasses. As such, this card is less Gust and more guff. Although I do enjoy that the art depicts exactly what it felt like to deal with KIRIN back in the day. Majespecter Tornado is a normal trap card that has you tributing a wind spellcaster to target one monster your opponent controls and banish it. Now that's more like it! While Storm has the more effective removal, and Cyclone has the benefit of being usable at a moment's notice during emergencies, Tornado strikes a middle ground between those two cards. It's slower to come online than Cyclone, but provides more effective removal in exchange. And while Banishing doesn't get around monster effects that activate when those monsters leave the field like Storm does, it's significantly harder to get that monster back from the banished zone than the grave. And Tornado being a trap card obviously means we can also use it to jam up our opponent's play sequences, unlike Storm, which as a normal spell is exclusively for breaking boards. But seeing this art has given me a bit of a brainwave. I've always questioned why Storm Chasers actively seek out tornadoes. Well, if every tornado has a cute pettable wind raccoon at its center, I totally get it, sign me up! Majespecter Tempest is a counter trap card that has you tributing a wind spellcaster monster when a monster would be special summoned or a monster effect is activated. You negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Yeah, we already have more removal than we know what to do with, so let's throw a searchable Solemn Strike into the mix as well, because why not? What's more, Tempest doesn't even cost you any life points. And since we'll be tributing a monster as cost, we can even use it to trigger Draco. Absolutely wild. As far as counter traps go, this is going to make your opponent's life miserable, so we naturally want to hit them with it as much as possible. After all, hell is empty, and all the evil critters are here. God, are we really quoting Shakespeare now? I have got to get some new puns. Majespecter Supercell is a continuous trap card that prevents the activation and effects of other Majespecter cards activated on your field from being negated while you have a Majespecter card in your Pendulum Zone. And once per turn, you can target 5 Majespecter cards in your grave and on resolution, shuffle all 5 into the deck, then draw a card. Yup, we have an on-theme Pot of Avarice that we can use every single turn. And if you didn't notice, it also lets you recycle your spells and traps, making the Majespecter grind game very real. Plus, it even prevents our opponent from interfering with our setups, including Nue. But there is a bit of a problem here. Because Majespecters are primarily a back row focused deck, slots in the back row are a precious resource. Back in Master Rule 3, this wasn't a problem at all, with the Pendulum Zones being separate from your back row. Nowadays, we're only going to have 3 to work with in most cases. And with Supercell being a continuous trap card, it's going to be sticking around on the field, essentially taking up a whole third of the space we would use to place disruption tools in. And on top of that, it is a trap card, so that negation protection isn't going to do much to help your Nue if it gets impermed on turn 1. So since the game probably isn't going to last long enough to justify having to play the grind game anyway, it's not inexcusable to pass this card over. Supercell is a nice option, but it's certainly no perfect sell. Okay, now that we've covered all the Majespecter cards, here's a combo that will show you just how much advantage this deck can grind out from only a couple of cards. All we're gonna need for this combo is a single Bunbuku and a card to discard. Start by normal summoning your Bunbuku, using its effect to search out Yama Arashi. Since you control a Majespecter, you can immediately summon that Yama-Arashi from your hand with its effect. Link Bunbuku and Yama-Arashi into Nue, and use Nue's on summon effect to add back those two monsters, adding Yatta and Majesty Pegasus from your deck to your face-up extra deck. From there, we'll scale Bunbuku and Yama-Arashi, and Pendulum summon Majesty Pegasus and Yatta, using those two effects to add Majespecter Wind and Majesty's Pegasus from your deck to your hand, discarding that random card we had in hand for Majesty Pegasus' effect. Now we'll overlay Pegasus and Yatta to summon Draco, then activate Wind, tributing Nue to special summon Ogama from your deck. On a new chain, Ogama will set a Majespecter trap card from your deck as Chain Link 2, and at Chain Link 1, Draco will detach a material to summon Kyuubi from your deck, which will then search you a second Majespecter trap card. Make sure you resolve those two effects in that order, because if you resolve Draco as Chain Link 2, Kyuubi will miss timing. Now we'll activate Majesty's Pegasus, tributing either of our level 4 Majespecters to summon Nekomata from the deck. On another new chain, Nekomata will activate its effect to get you another Majespecter search at the end phase, and Draco will detach its second material to summon a second Yama-Arashi from your deck. Its effect will now trigger because we didn't use it on its initial summon, resetting the Majespecter winds in your graveyard. Finally, we'll overlay Yama-Arashi and our other level 4 to summon Magister Paladin the Dracoslayer, which will get us another end phase search of any Pendulum monster you want. So from 2 cards, you've set up 2 disruptive effects with your 2 trap cards, and have gotten every single Majespecter which is currently legal into rotation. And you even have Nekomata and Magister Paladin searching you 2 cards during the end phase, meaning this whole turn cost you nothing in card advantage. Alright, so that's all the Majespecter cards, but what do we do with them? If all the tools that we have laying around to derail our opponent's combos aren't an indicator of this, control is in our blood. So our first priority is to get all of our names into rotation, while grabbing as much of our back row as possible to disrupt as many critical plays as we can. And once our opponent's worn out, we'll perform a big Pendulum summon to blow them away on the crackback. But what can we play to help them out? Well, because the summon restriction of Nue excludes us from summoning anything except Majespecters and our Draco-slaying friends, on top of the fact that Majesty Pegasus is one of them, we have no excuse to not be running some other Dracoslayers. Ignis Phoenix is a great card to scale alongside Majesty Pegasus, unlocking Pegasus' search effect and summoning another Dracoslayer from your deck once you pop Ignis for that effect. It's even scale 7, so if we ever get KIRIN back, you'll be able to Pendulum summon it too. And if you search Dynamite Power Load off of Majesty Pegasus' effect, you can use their Pendulum effect to summon Majesty Pegasus from your scale, and congrats, you've not only enabled the field spell searching effect, but if you started with Ignis, you've also gathered 2 Pendulums on board to make Nue with. As for the extra deck Dracoslayers, Dinoster Power works great alongside Draco, since summoning it requires that you tribute monsters. This will then fire off the deck summoning effective Draco, because it works when any monster gets tributed for any reason. You could even feed a Draco that's out of material to Dinoster Power, which will let you throw Draco into your scales for an extra search. And Ignister Prominence is still one of the most bonkers forms of removal you could ask for. So since Ignis Phoenix kindly makes whatever you summon with it into a tuner, why not take advantage of it? Because we're a control deck, Floodgates are usually going to be our first port of call, but as a Pendulum deck that makes heavy use of the back row, continuous trap cards don't exactly jive with us. But we did just finish talking about Majesty Pegasus, and since that card adds any field spell from our deck to our hand, what devious options do we have access to? Well, Necro Valley is certainly a classic. While Majespecter monsters will occasionally find their way into our grave after being detached as Xyz material, for the most part we don't actually have to worry about being able to summon from the grave, so it actually ends up being much more of a one-sided floodgate in this case than it may appear. And of course, we are a spellcaster deck, so Secret Village of the Spellcasters can be absolutely backbreaking for your opponent. Slap this thing down after you summon some Majespecters, and that's access to a third of the card pool completely denied to your opponent. Unless they're also on a spellcaster deck themselves, in which case, Majesty's Pegasus is probably still your best bet. Draco's effect to summon any wind spellcaster from your deck is basically an open invitation to make some sort of hybrid deck, and what other wind spellcaster themes can we tap into? Wind Witches! Summon a Glass Bell with Draco's effect, and that'll get you access to Snowbell, giving you 2 tuners to work with. And chances are that you'll have a spare level 4 Majespecter on board, so it's super easy to climb up into an indestructible Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon from there. Or if you're starting from an empty board, we can secure ourselves against Nibiru with the Ice Bell line. This does wind lock you, but you are running a wind deck, so you should be fine. And by going through Winter Bell, we can even inflict a little burn damage while we're at it, because who doesn't like cheesing their opponent in time? It goes without saying that we should be running beyond the Pendulum. After all, adding any Pendulum monster you like from your deck to your hand for the low price of a little bone damage is, as it turns out, pretty good. But because so many of our effects trigger on summon, Exceed the Pendulum is also going to shine in Majespecters. It'll get Bunbuku back out of your extra deck so that you're ready for your next turn once you link summon it at the bare minimum, but with Majespecter Wind being the only on-theme way to get back your Majespecters, which are stuck in the grave, pulling them back out as a quick effect and triggering their search effects when you do so is to die for. Now make sure you wait until resolution before you do this to prevent any timing from being missed. And Exceed the Pendulum also pulls double duty by being a great bridge into Access Code Talker when it's time to throw your opponent directly into the sun. Now, you know how much of a lorehead I am, and whenever there's an opportunity for a lore crossover, I simply have to take it. So, despite my burning hatred for the archetype, meet Gen X Blast Fan. Looks may be deceiving, but this actually is an honest-to-goodness wind spellcaster, so it fits right in with us. Special summon it off of Draco or Pendulum summon it, and it'll search you Gen X ally Birdman, which may just be Revolution Synchron at home, but the synchro options it can let us access are stellar. It's even the card that enables our pseudo-search of Drolan Lockbird I mentioned earlier. Just bounce it back to your hand once you special summon it with Draco, and you've got yourself a Lingering Floodgate ready to go. As for the synchro options, Ancient Fairy Dragon is probably our best fit, since we can play another Spectre from our hand if need be, and cycle out those devious field spells. Or if you need a little more aggression, you could use Odd Eye's Meteor Burst Dragon, which can keep your opponent off of monster effects during the battle phase, and pluck a Majespecter out of your scales for an extra search if need be. I know I gave Majespecter Gust some grief over this a little while ago, but Meteor Burst actually does it in a timely manner, so he gets a pass. As for a silly tech pick, Majespecters aren't exactly known for being big bruisers. Sure, we can build up a field of massive link monsters, but come on, that's boring. However, if you're on the Blast Fan package that I was just talking about, then Nirvana High Paladin is right at your fingertips. If you happen to Pendulum summon a Bunbuku or Nekomata, then you can use that as the tuner substitute alongside the level 7 you made with Birdman to go into this. And Nirvana can scoop up any card from your grave when it's summoned, from hand traps to Majespecter traps, and it even slices your opponent's life points in half when it beats a monster, making it even easier for you to close the game out on the spot. And that's not even mentioning the shenanigans you can get up to if you manage to get Nirvana into your scales. 2021 may not be worth living in, but I'm having a blast playing Nirvana High Paladin. Alright, that's all I know about Majespecters, but how do they measure up against the Nova scale? Novelty. The development of Pendulum was at a point where it was eager to show off how it interacted with other mechanics. Ignite showed that destroying your own revivable monsters wasn't a big deal, and now Majespecters would do the same for tributing, on top of showing just how busted on summon effects could get on monsters you could resummon over and over again. Not to mention that they weren't afraid to lean into the still rare Wind Spellcaster combination, so I have no problem awarding Majespecters a 5 in novelty. Objectivity. The protections that each Majespecter had back in the day made them pretty difficult to work around. Even if you had the advantage of power and numbers, you still had to chew through a whole field of these fur nuggets every turn, giving that player plenty of time to stabilize. Nowadays, with better forms of removal and more restrictions on Pendulum summoning, the deck has been brought to heel, so it's less blow your house down and more being a blow hard. That being said, the new support is no joke, and the removal options granted to us are very strong. I could be overestimating them, but I feel like these cards are going to be a hurricane force to be reckoned with, so they're getting a 4 in objectivity. Versatility. When Pendulums were young, Majespecters were an easy splash due to their absurd levels of searching effects and powerful removal tools. A searchable Solemn Strike is, after all, no joke. Nowadays, these options are a bit more bricky than dedicated Pendulum piles, and so these critters don't tend to see play in other themes. We will, of course, be more than happy to incorporate any Pendulum support that's been released, but with them needing a large amount of engine cards to function properly, we're looking at a 3 in versatility. Awesomeness. Your mileage may vary depending on how you feel about control decks on this one. Now that Majespecters are incentivized to play as few floodgates as possible, it's much more interaction based, which you may find more fair and enjoyable. Me? I think the concept is cool, but it's now kind of lost in the slurry of pendulum good stuff we have access to. Being a Dracoslayer adjacent deck helps for me, especially since the new support ties them in much more closely, but with the looming danger of the deck turning into Droll-and-Lock Turbo, I'm giving the theme a tentative 3 in awesomeness, meaning Majespecters get a 15 on the Nova scale from me. And that's all I have to say about Majespecters. The theme has fallen on some hard times, lacking its best payoff and 2 whole zones, dealing a big blow to their control playstyle. But I'm confident that with this new support and a little Dracoslayer magic, these mythic monsters will claw their way back to playability and show the meta they aren't out of the game yet, thanks to this second wind. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Majespecters a breeze to play, or are they still a natural disaster of an archetype? And which one's your favorite? For me, it's not a particular monster, but Majespecter Gust. Take a look at that art, it's just the best. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like the video, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales that also come with their own lore while saving 5% on your order. Just make sure to use code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode is also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including the illustrious Quasar Commanders Frankie and Marluxia as a girl, Nebula Navigators 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Danny Bound, Dark Dragon X830, Eric, Aaron the Worldbreaker, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Great Big Pillock, Hair Bear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Hydrocraft 135, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Mega Combi, Millennia Asta, Molly Renata, Muzuki Clark, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Sir Knight JCB, Skybuster Leo, The Wizard Moose, URTV 667 and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Alpha Sly, Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Beluga Masta, Blue Gem, Borger with a Shotgun, Chaz Ghost, Corbinisms, Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Emily, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Howling Zangetsu, Herbal D, Inblink, Jester Design, Kale the Dragon, Carp, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Michael Shimabukuro, Mustafa Aiden, Nitromo, Psycho Reaper Gaming, Shizuki Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, The Legendary Raven, Tucker Ordorn, Venusian Teapot, and Zeldreka, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey in covering all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits, and participate in monthly custom card reviews, I'd be super grateful if you'd consider checking out my Patreon in the description or joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to learn more about the Dracoslayers, or at least what my understanding of them was, check out this video all about the Dracoslayer Storyline. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This does wind lock you, but you are running a wind deck. No.